Is the WHO trying to grab power and rule the world? Well, last week, the World Health Organization released a new draft of the pandemic treaty that we've all been collectively freaking out about. And it was much less severe, but in my opinion, still undesirable. But let's get a second opinion, because that's what you do in medicine. Dr. Kat Lindley joins us. She is with the Global Health Project, one of the co-founders, who has been warning us about the WHO and this treaty, warning the the United States and other nations. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me today.
Okay, so is this still a scary document? And if so, why?
I believe it is. Like you said, there were some changes to the document and the language has been watered down. Some of the things are kind of hidden behind the legalese. So we need to make sure that we understand that. They did cross out the non-binding portion, but you just kind of have to realize that there is still, binding element to it, because the member countries do have to respond to like IMF and central bank and things like that. So there is much more language that still is there. Censorship has been stricken out of Article 44, but now it's in the, what is it called?
It's surveillance.
That's in the addendum. Yes, it's exactly. It's called surveillance, and it's still there, so it needs to be acknowledged, because the countries are still expected to surveil and make sure that the language is appropriate and approved by the World Health Organization. And then if you look at the treaty itself, the treaty talks about how they don't have to tell us exactly now how they're going to put the One Health agenda forward. They actually have until May of 2026. So you have to think about what we did with Obamacare, right? You have to sign it now, and then you're going to find out what's in it. It's kind of the same type of tactic that the World Health Organization is using, and we have to be very afraid of what they can put in the document later on.
What do you mean by IMF and central bank?
So, a lot of this funding and what's happening with the country member states and loans and things like that go through IMF and the central bank. So while the language non-binding is taken out of the amendments to international health regulations, the member states will still have to comply to make sure that these relations remain intact.
Okay. And one of the things that really gave me heartache is that even if you sign it as a nation state and then you decide you want to leave, it seems the language is that you have to wait until 2 years after signing the document, and then you have a full year after that before your withdrawal. So it's worse than a gym membership. So how could they enforce this if, say, a President Trump gets in, withdraws, and says, we're not paying this anymore? Then what? They don't have an army, right? What are they going to do?
So I actually listened to your segment on this, and I liked your contributor. I forget his name, but I'm like him. I totally agree. I'm with Phil. If we decide to leave, we're going to leave and say, bye-bye, have fun. Because you're right. How can they really enforce this? The only way, again, how they could enforce it could be through the IMF and central bank, and put pressure and maybe do sanctions or things like that, or say that we owe money or are delinquent on loans or things like that. So I would say that's the way that they could impose us, to give them time to leave. But they don't have an army. United Nations has one, but again, I think that's kind of far-fetched to think that we would have any kind of armed conflict with United Nations or anything like that.
Right. Now, one of the portions also that I really didn't like was saying that, nation states need to submit their laws to revisions so that if there's an emergency, the WHO can sort of break through any laws that allow civil liberties and change that. That seems like a major power grab in and of itself, and I did not read that in previous documents. Was that, and I missed it?
No, I didn't see it in previous documents either. And you were correct. You mentioned Louisiana, and we have, Alabama that's trying to pass some bills in their legislation. Tennessee is working on it. So you have all these state legislations who are trying to do their job to protect their citizens from the jurisdiction of the World Health Organization. And now you have World Health Organization saying you have to put this in your own, legal binding documents and bills and things like that, and say that you will comply to international health regulation. And that's kind of like, when we talk about that binding, non-binding, they get around to that by saying you will have to have different rules and regulations that allow the IHRs to come into place.
That's terrifying, saying we are going to come into your country and rewrite your laws to give us power in the Trojan horse of emergency. So that almost seems worse than previous documents, don't you think?
Well, it's interesting. People don't know that One Health is actually already part of the Health and Human Services in the United States. We already have the One Health department. I almost feel that many of these things are kind of plug and play. As soon as these things are passed, these programs are just going to go online. To give you an example, CDC is actually giving grants to different states to start doing the surveillance on pathogens. So it's just a matter of time for these amendments, new regulations, and the treaty to come into place. And many of these things are already being accomplished kind of behind our backs.
Yikes. Okay. Also, they say that each nation state needs to submit to WHO trainers who will come in and see if your climate policies are up to snuff and what needs to be changed, if they think anything in your business practices could lead to a pandemic. So one of the things that bothers me, I don't know the most, it all bothers me a lot, so I can't really get, but one of the things that upsets me is that the WHO was not held to account for what they did in Congo. So how do any of us know that we don't get a group of trainers that are bad guys like the ones in Congo?
Yeah, we won't have any control over that. And you're correct. It doesn't make any sense to be having this supranational agency and the trainers that are pretty much appointed by the Director General come into, our country, our states, and tell us how we need to do things. It's really important to realize that not only saying no is what we have to do. We truly have to exit the World Health Organization. World Health Organization is just an arm of United Nations. And many of these policies, we should start looking at United Nations. They have something called the Pact for the Future, and they have Summit of the Future coming in September in New York. Many of these things that are happening through World Health Organization are just a small part of that Pact for the Future. And this huge power grab by United Nations. This all has to do with global governance. The biggest goal that the United Nations has is global governance. I know you guys are in Europe, and I was just in Europe, but EU is starting with this one Europe. We are all one Europe. It's the same thing is happening in the United Nations. They are starting to say we are all one world, we are all one planet. And many of these things that we're right now fighting with the World Health Organization are just a small part of this big agenda of global governance.
Yikes. And so is this treaty then a foregone conclusion under President Biden, since the vote is going to happen under his power? And is there anything we can do to stop it as American citizens?
Well, I do feel that there is good news. And the good news is the fact that they have to keep on revising this treaty and the amendments to international health regulation, because people like you and me and others have raised the alarm in all of our countries. And we are kind of putting our legislators on notice and saying, we know what you're doing. We don't want it. Get rid of it. Now, the pandemic treaty, but it has potential to pass. But the problem is this new draft is so vague. There are many things they don't have to decide right now. Some of them they can decide a year from now, some of them 2 years from now. And I'm hoping that maybe not our representatives, but the other country representatives are going to kind of bullshit on it.
Yeah.
And say, we're not having it, right?
Right.
The problem with our representation is many of these amendments are coming from our own representation. Some of them have been given to other countries and say, hey, you submitted, but we've kind of written it. And if you look at the Constitution of United Nations, the article, I believe, is 55. It says that the IHR amendments have to be submitted 4 months before the assembly. Everyone has to see them. They have to know what's in them and then vote on them. We are April 29th now? Mm-hmm. And we just had a new draft. They're meeting again to make some changes. So they're going to vote on something that in their own constitution they shouldn't be doing. If we had a representation that I believed in, then I would say our representatives would go in and say, we're not doing it. You guys didn't submit this. Exactly. But we don't. We have representatives that pretty much have given these amendments to the World Health Organization and put most of them in. So my fear is that we will not be represented in a legal and ethical manner, and that our administration will push for this to pass. My hope is in countries like Croatia, which is my home country, in Italy, in
we've seen
Estonia, some of these countries.
Estonia, New Zealand.
Yes, exactly.
Australia, Japan.
I think hopefully, yes. Hopefully these countries are going to be the ones that will put brakes on this, because we do not need this. They want to keep us in this perpetual state of pandemic. Pandemics don't happen as much as they want us to happen, but they want them because they want, 100-day vaccines. They want no liability on these new products. They want Director General to pretty much call for an emergency and then dictate what type of treatments we have, diagnostics. They want vaccine passports. They don't call them passports anymore. They call them like travel documents. But they want all this because they want to control the way of life on Earth, and we have to just say no.
Yeah.
Keep on saying no.
Right. Get loud. Tell your representatives you don't want this. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your insight. You should follow Dr. Kat Lindley at KL Veritas. She really is on top of all of this news, as well as her project, the Global Health Project, because they're fighting back on behalf of all of us. So thank you again for coming on Redacted.
Thanks for having me.
I really hoped you enjoyed watching this video. YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it. And we will see you next time, everyone.